live, everyone.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the October 28th, 2020 meeting of the Fairfax County Park Authority. I'm Bill Bowie. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance, the Park Authority Board needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record, as we did at our first electronic meeting. During our meeting, if you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand. And when I recognize you, please state your name. This will ensure that you are recognized and the public knows who's speaking. If you intend to vote A or abstain on any item, we will need to do a roll call on those votes. Because each member of this board is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all other members to hear. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call, ask each board member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear everybody else. And following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member's voice. And we will start by going alphabetically. Dr. Adu.
Abna Adus, participating from my residence in Lee District.
Dr. Carter.
Cynthia Jacobs Carter, participating from my residence in Lee District.
Maggie Godbold.
Maggie Godbold, participating from my residence in the Sully District.
Linwood Gorham.
Linwood Gorham, participating from my kitchen in the Mount Vernon Ditch District.
Tim Hackman.
Tim Hackman, participating from my residence in the Drainsville District.
Ron Kendall.
Ron Kendall, participating from my home in Mason District.
Faisal Khan.
Participating from my kitchen in Providence District.
Ken Quincy. Ken Quincy. Ken Quincy. I think we lost him. Okay, we'll come back to Ken. Oh, you're okay.
I'm back.
All right, good.
I muted myself.
Okay.
Ken Quincy, I'm at my residence in the Providence District.
All right, Kyle Stone.
Kyle Stone from my residence in the Braddock District.
Mike Thompson.
Mike Thompson from my residence in the Springfield District.
Jim Zook. You're on mute, Jim.
There we go.
There you go.
Jim Zook, participating from my home in Springfield District.
Great. And I'm Bill Bowie, participating from my residence in the Hunter Mill District. At this point, I will pass the virtual gavel over to Vice Chairman Quincy so that I may be heard to make the requisite motion. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of this board.
Ken Quincy, you have heard the motion. Is there a second?
Mike Thompson, and I second the motion.
Ken Quincy, it has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. The motion passes.
Thank you. This is Bill Bowie. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this board to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this board and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this board may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated video service. It so move.
Ken Quincy, you have heard the motion. Is there a second?
Tim Hackman, I second the motion.
Quincy, is there discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Mr. Chairman, the motion passes.
Thanks, Ken. This is Bill Bowie. Finally, it is next required that all of the matters addressed on today's agenda must address the state of emergency itself or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of this board's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved.
Ken Quincy, you have heard the motion. Is there discussion?
This is Mike Thompson, and I second the motion.
Excuse me. Ken Quincy, motion's been seconded. Is there discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you, Ken. Now that all the preliminary matters are complete, we can now begin with the meeting. Thank you very much. So, administrative item, countywide, admin item number 1 is the adoption of the minutes of the October 14th, 2020 Park Authority Board meeting.
Second, Ken Quincy.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Action item, countywide, A1 is the resident curator program update and conservation lease with a presentation. David?
Yes, Bill, I am here.
Great.
I'll wait for Don to start the presentation, but I just want to say thank you all for being here this evening, and we're happy to update you on the resident curator program. We've obviously had some downtime with COVID here and there, but overall we're making progress with the curator program, and we're excited to tell you about it this evening. Next slide, please, Don. So as you know, we have several properties active now. The Stempson house in Lorton, which we now up to just over $75,000 the curator has put back into the property. And you can see some of the upcoming projects that are going to be done later this year and into the spring and summer next year. So we're very excited about where he's at with his investment, because his total investment is about $190,000. So that's really well along where it should be. Next slide, please. You can see some of the improvements and landscaping, some paths that were originally around the house that have been uncovered. The windows have been reworked and redone, and some of the chimneys have been capped and reworked as well. So there's some images of that. Next slide, please. Next slide, Don. So Turner Farm, obviously we were very excited to get that project going, and we're still waiting on the SE application. But what is really a good news there is that we have over $250,000 put back into Turner Farm. So this is really exciting. And we have obviously a great deal of volunteer investment that the curator has been able to go out into the community and achieve a lot of community help as well as corporate help. So you'll see some of that in the images ahead. But the big thing there is that, you know, that volunteer investment is not included in the curator's investment. So that's just a side note. And as you see, the SE is still, it has been submitted and it is in the process with DPZ. Next slide, please. This is a great shot because it really shows how much improvement has occurred in the basement of the Turner Farmhouse. As you can see, the before shot, and now the curator's already holding meetings in the basement with significant improvements there. Floors, the drywall, all the paint and everything. So this is very exciting to see the before and after there. Next slide, please. Again, some before and after shots. This is the hallway as you enter the farmhouse. The floors have been redone, painting and plasterwork has occurred, and obviously it looks more like a home now than it did before. Next slide, please. Even the little milk house, which was really something that we really hadn't considered as a big part of the overall investment, but the curator, Sarah Kirk, was able to get some help from the church in the area, and they had done some significant volunteer work there, nearly $30,000 that they put back into this little structure, and it's going to become kind of a reflecting area for people who may come to the center if the SE is approved. So there's a before and after of that as well. Next slide, please. And then our third curator property, the Hannah P. Clark House in Lorton as well. We have an interim lease there because, as you know, we waited on the full-term lease. That is going to be executed in the spring of 21. But we already have the curator there who's put back over $20,000 back into that house. And they're very happy there. And the most exciting thing there is this particular curator is ideally suited for this home because she actually is a preservation joiner who works at Mount Vernon. So the situation is ideal. We couldn't have picked a better curator for the property. And then some of the upcoming projects there, obviously the interior and exterior will be painted. And I was just there this past week, and it really does feel like a home again. And that's the biggest thing, you know, when you go back into these sites and after they've been derelict and vacant for so long and now people are living in them, it really is an exciting thing to see.
David, this is why did we have to use the interim lease there?
Well, we wanted to move forward with that because of COVID. So Linwood, we did execute a shorter lease, and we had a very, very viable curator there, and we didn't want to lose them. They had a situation where they were going to have some type of lease somewhere, and we would have lost them as an option if we didn't execute the one-year interim lease.
What were we missing that we couldn't execute the longer lease?
I'm sorry, Linwood, you kind of broke up there.
What were we missing that we couldn't execute the longer lease?
Time frame. We needed time. We had to go to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
There were no meetings available.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Next slide, please. So we have the Elmore Farmhouse, which is also in process. We're working on the lease currently for Service Source. We have a draft lease that we're reviewing. We will be at the BOS public hearing by the close of calendar year 20. They are going to be working on a special exception for their nonprofit use. And obviously, we won't execute the lease until the SE is approved. Next slide, please. One of the other properties we had in process, which would have been our fifth property, Leahy, we had one application which started the evaluation team review process, but during this process we found that there were multiple things we really couldn't quite come to terms with the applicants. So we asked them to strengthen the application, and shortly after that they withdrew the application. So we are back to square one with Leahy. Next slide, please. And our upcoming sites, obviously we've already advertised Ash Grove before, but we will re-advertise it again. I don't think it's necessarily a downside that we advertise properties and we don't always get the right curators, or maybe we don't get any. It's very much like a real estate situation. You know, sometimes you put your house on the market, you may get, you know, multiple people interested in it, and sometimes nobody's interested in it. It's just the timing and, you know, who the applicants are. So we'll re-advertise Ash Grove next year, as well as Margaret White Gardens will be up for the first time. Both of those are also EIP projects that we're working on with the county for potential energy conservation benefits like HVAC, windows being redone, insulation, those type of things. And that will also lower the treatment plans on those two properties, which will help us to attract curators. Next slide, please. More of our upcoming properties. We continue to make progress with the Barrett House in Lorton. We do have public water connected there now. We also have the septic installation. It is installed. We're waiting on testing, which requires electricity, which is almost finished. We're just waiting on a Dominion connection, and it's really just their schedule to get the connection made across the Lorton Road. But we're excited because we feel like within the next 60 days, Barrett House will be ready. Drainsville Tavern is another site that we have. We're working on a historic structure report and a treatment plan, which is 95% complete. Next slide, please. Some of our future sites that we've looked at for the curator program that are on our list. The Sears House, we just recently did a public water connection there. That is complete. And then we have the Mount Gilead House, which is currently occupied in a lease situation. But we are working on a historic structure report and a treatment plan, which we now have a draft of as of yesterday. So we'll continue to evaluate this house throughout the remaining term of the lease of the current tenant. Next slide, please. One of the things we've also done over the past few months, while we haven't been able to update you all, is we have a feature on the resident curator website that allows you to go in and actively review the sites we have available on a map, and gives you the kind of a GIS format that shows the sites that are available, current resident curator sites, some photographs, and also some information about the site. So this is something we're pretty excited about. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to talk about this evening is obviously we have several sites that we're working on for the curator program, and we have more after that. But then we also have sites that don't necessarily qualify for the resident curator program, given that we had parameters originally with the program that our investments would need to be for the curator between $155,000 and $405,000. So if the costs are below that or above that, then we kind of fall into this category where it's very difficult for us to write a fair market value rental lease. The formula doesn't work for us. So we have several sites that we've looked at to potentially consider for what we call conservation lease. And they're a little bit different in the fact that we still intend to recoup the fair market value of the property, but we would do it on a monthly rental basis or lease. And we would still have our oversight of the property. We would still have a process to identify which sites are conservation lease and how we get to the point where they are offered as conservation lease. It just wouldn't involve the Board of Supervisors. It still would involve the public component. We would still recoup the fair market rental rate, and we would still move towards the overall cost of the rehabilitation of the property. Next slide, please. So here's kind of the differences between the two situations. Obviously, with a conservation lease, we would still need to do some type of RFI, so it would be a transparent and fair program. There would also be financial and background review, which we obviously do with the resident curator program. We would use the same evaluation team to review the applicants and the scoring. We would still have the Office of the County Attorney reviewing the lease. We would have you all as the Park Authority Board to approve our conservation lease. and that is where the process would end. Obviously, with the resident curator lease, we still have the Board of Supervisors public meeting and approval, and that process adds some significant time to the overall process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, these properties that don't fit the resident curator model, an example would be we did a market rate value appraisal of a few of our sites. So for example, if you did a fair market rental value of a monthly lease of $4,200, but required $3,000 of that to be put back into the house as either work as sweat equity or work as contracted work, then each month, obviously, we're working towards something for that property. They're also going to provide upkeep and maintenance. We would still require them to do a public benefits for the site. We would also obviously eliminate many of our vacant properties. And there's approximately 7 sites that we would target for conservation lease currently. Next slide, please. So these would be some of our targets that we would look at. Sears House, which is obviously in Centerville, the Lamond House in Alexandria, McDaniel House in the Drainsville District, Stony Brook, which is over in Alexandria, Clark House in Annandale, Wakefield Chapel, Annandale, Banks property, which is in Alexandria, and the Lewinsville House in McLean. So these would be our initial targets that we would look at. Next slide, please. So we would look at the request for information in RFI, which would include obviously the proposed use, how they would fund the conservation, either on a total basis or as it would work for the lease term. Their experience and qualifications would also be reviewed, and how the public benefit would benefit the overall property would be analyzed. We would have the Department of Finance review the financial information as we do with the curator program. Again, we would look at the evaluation team for scoring, and we would have our annual inspections by our operations portion of Heritage Conservation Group. Next slide, please. So we would propose that our pilot properties for the conservation lease concept be the Lamond House in Alexandria and the Sears House in Centerville. We did rental analyses on both of those sites. For the Lamond House, it is $4,200 approximately that we would need to recoup each month as a fair market rental value. And we, as I mentioned earlier, would expect a good portion of that to be put back into the house or actual work to be done. With the Sears House, we were surprised to find that we did have a pretty substantial treatment plan there, but it still doesn't fit that 155 target that we talked about earlier. So therefore, it is a pretty small investment for the resident curator program. We wouldn't get much of a lease there. It would be a very short lease. Again, so this is a better potential target for conservation lease. We have a monthly rental appraisal there of $1,200 to $1,800 a month. So again, we would expect some of that to be recouped in a conservation lease situation. Next slide, please. So our proposed strategy that we would like to propose to you all this evening is that we would like to issue an RFI on Lamond and Sears, potentially in FY20. And we may include Lewinsville in that, depending on the interest that we have from some groups there. We would promote this from the PIO of the Park Authority, as well as the Resident Curator website and social media. And we would target FY21 for our initial conservation lease. Next slide, please. So I'm happy to take any questions that you all have, and I can start my video so you can see me if you like.
Sure. All right, yeah, I've got a few questions on this one. One is, what do you think the proposed lease terms are going to be in terms of length?
Well, they can't be so long that, it doesn't, if they're too long, then it would probably be better to go into the resident curator situation with the fair market rental value equation. But in the case of like Sears House, I would say somewhere between 7 and 10 years.
Okay, so they're still pretty extended periods of time.
Yeah, and if you figure this, 12 to $1,800 a month times that, I mean, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, that is pretty significant. Second question would be, how much more staff time is this going to take? And where exactly in our puzzle of puzzles is this going to fit organizationally?
Well, right now I anticipate that we can handle the increased, 5 to 7 sites for conservation lease, given that we keep our current staff level that we have. And sorry?
No, it was just.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I anticipate we would have no troubles. One of the things I think been very successful with, given our limited number of resident curator sites currently, is even if we have not we do not have all of the most experienced curators, we're able to give them the education and some of the experience that they may need given our background and experience. So I think that's part of our job, is to really educate the people in these sites about how important they are and why we're trying to protect them.
Okay, last question would be, I had it at the tip of my tongue and I think I've forgotten it already. Okay, I think I'm set for right now. Linwood.
Okay, Bill.
Linwood.
So am I understanding this correctly, that the expectation would be that they're to pay rent, but in addition to the rent, they're to have a plan to keep the property maintained to get us out of that business? So this is kind of like a hybrid plan where, okay, it's yes, they're expected to do the work, so we don't have to do it.
That's right. Yeah.
The remainder is made up in cash, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you look at a little site like Sears House that doesn't require that much work, but you do want someone to be there, because what has happened, the Park Authority put a pretty substantial investment into that site back in the 2000s. Probably some of you remember. But it's been long enough now that the deferred maintenance and that we don't have the opportunity to conserve those things were done. They're already starting to fall apart, to fail. So we're going to have to put more money back into the site. We would be much better off to have someone there who could help us to take care of this. So what is, since we're expecting them to do the maintenance on it, and again, the difference is made up in cash, what's the big legal difference between this and the residential curator program that the Board of Supervisors wouldn't have to be involved in the approval process?
Well,
bingo. That was my question, Linwood.
Right. Well, the statute for the resident curator was so it wasn't just that, the Park Authority went into the business of being the resident curator program. It was that the Board of Supervisors established a program that we needed to administer. It's not the case with sites that are the park authorities, that we don't have to go through the Board of Supervisors process.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm understanding. But
okay.
As long as you say it's right, I'm taking your word for it. Thanks for your help.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Mike Thompson.
Thank you. This is Mike Thompson. David, the properties that we're considering, I don't have the list in front of me, but back in the day when we were first looking to create the residential curator program, we had a list of properties.
Yes.
Are all of these properties that we're considering from that list?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All of the sites that we look at are all part of that initial list.
And then if separately, because I had the same question Bill and Linwood did, perhaps separately, if there could be, even if it's in writing, some explanation as to why we can do it this way instead of the resident curator program, that would help me.
Sure. Yeah, it has to do with the statute, because the statute is written as such that the park authority is the administrative arm for the board of supervisors. Yeah.
Right. But I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, if we can do it with these properties, why can't we do it with all the other properties? In other words, whatever the distinguishing factor is, I would just like to understand that.
Sure.
And then one last thing just occurred to me. When we first set up this program, when the committee of different people in the county were working on setting this program up, there was discussion about potential need for change in the law, asking the General Assembly to make modifications.
Right.
We didn't want to do that right away for a variety of reasons. Are we in a position now where we know a little bit more and that we want to make those suggestions to our delegation?
Well, suggestions involve whether or not the resident curator would pay taxes on the property, because that is one thing that kind of hampers us in the fact that, we have to tell the potential curators right away, you're going to pay your tax every year on the site. So it adds a significant cost to their investment. But they would have to pay a tax on a site that they owned anyway. So just don't.
My recollection is it was also to do with the fact that if it was on our property, the park authority technically owned the site.
Right.
But because of the way the legislation was set up, we ended up either giving it back or leasing it to the board of supervisors. There was some weird property transactions that we were hoping to avoid.
Yeah, that is true. Because of the park authority could not, under the guise of the curator program, offer properties that way. But if there are properties and we just want to have them conserved, we can do it under what we call resident curator light, if you will.
Okay, I just bring it up as something to consider now as we get towards the General Assembly session.
Yeah, we have not talked about it in a while, but I don't think it's something that we've forgotten about. Right.
Ron Kendall.
Yeah, Ron Kendall. I just had the question about how Clark House ended up on the list for this. I think I'd need to see a lot more of what the planning process was for why we would go this way rather than trying to use it as an actual park property. I know it's going to be used as a park property for Hidden Oaks renovation, and it has historically been used as a property by both Green Spring Gardens and Hidden Oaks over time. So I'd like to see the balance sheet between that and the idea of it being a conservation property.
Yeah. Obviously, pretty far down that list. But the thought was it is somewhat underutilized currently, and yes, it will be used from time to time for renovations, meetings, things like that. But we don't have a clear future for it, so we would look at it for its best case scenario in the future as well.
Cynthia.
Take this property in the district. What would the mid to long-term plan be for something like that? I was trying to recall whether or not that was on that conservation list as well.
Did you say Banks? I'm sorry. I think you said Banks. Yeah, okay. Well, Banks is a unique situation, and I would offer that all of our situations are unique, but Banks is particularly unique because of the amount of infrastructure work that needs to go into it to make it a viable site. We could offer it in a conservation water, And all of that is pretty far to be connected. So you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get it to be a viable site. But I wouldn't rule it out as a candidate for the conservation lease concept.
Thank
you.
So I also think that based on some of the discussion that we've heard and some of the history of the houses, that each time we would want to go down the conservation lease path, we first talk with the park board to see if it's the case where the house should go. There are some houses that are definitely on the list for the resident curator program. Everybody's in agreement with those. It's the ones that are kind of in the middle ground at the lower level that we're trying to conserve as well as protect.
Mr. Quincy.
David, you mentioned the importance of adequate staff to carry out this program. Is there use of volunteers also, and to what extent?
Yes, we do have the Historic Site Volunteer Corps, which we utilize at least once a month to go to some of these sites and do some work for us, whether it's clearing overgrown landscaping or some minor painting and even some small carpentry projects. So we do have a pretty substantial following that we every month do it at one of our sites. And we also offer those that assistance for the people who have at our resident curator sites as well. So it's also kind of a unique incentive for us to bring some of the volunteers over to help out the curators. So
thanks, Dave.
Sure.
Sarah Baldwin, Deputy Director. I just want to go back to the question about process in terms of having the Board of Supervisors approve the lease. So the legislation dictates the process that the Board of Supervisors has to approve the lease for the resident curator properties. However, we dictate the properties that go into the program. So if we don't put the house into the program, it would not need to go through that process.
That's right, Sarah. Yes. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other discussion around this? Mike Thompson?
Yeah, this is Mike Thompson. Bill, this is actually a question, I guess, about my understanding of what we would do tonight. When we say that we're going to approve the concept, are we just saying, yes, we approve the idea, or are we also approving the homes that have been, the properties that have been discussed as going into it?
No.
Amy?
This is Amy Vosper. We would only be approving, you all would only be approving the concept. We would come back with the houses.
Thank you.
Any other discussion around this? Is there a motion to accept the concept of the conservation lease?
Yes, this is Maggie Godbold, and I make a motion to approve the conservation lease concept.
This is Linwood Gorham. I second that motion.
All right, this is Bill Bowie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed say nay. The motion carries. Thank you. All right, information item number 1 countywide is the FY19, FY20 strategic plan update with the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Kirk and Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Kirk Kincannon, Executive Director of the Park Authority, and Sarah Baldwin.
Sarah Baldwin, Deputy Director.
So Sarah and I will go over the strategic plan and say thanks. It's been an interesting nearly 8 months related to the COVID. And so our strategic plan, go ahead and share that if you would, Anna. Actually covers a little bit longer time frame than we normally would, since we've been focused on the COVID. We probably would have brought this to you last year, the first part of it. Next slide. So as you recall, the master plan that you all approved sets a 10-year direction for the Park Authority. And on the left, you can see the guiding principles that are key components of our strategic plan and how we benchmark and look at our measurements going forward. It all leads back to these guiding principles that you all approved. So much of what you'll see tonight is going to be very consistent with what we've identified in the past prior to COVID, and some of it is new or different in the terms that we will call out explicitly in relation to the actions that we've taken related to these guiding principles, but in part as a result of the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So we definitely want to inspire a passion for parks. One of the things I think that we all found interesting, I don't think we doubted what we saw, and we certainly experienced what we saw, but was the amount of passion the community had for their parks during the time frame that we actually shut the parks down to help lower the curve related to the pandemic. But in addition to that very visible passion for the parks, we've worked internally to secure a lot of other mechanisms that will help us inspire a passion for parks, including our public outreach for community engagement, which is a new software program. It's called Public Input. And we use that for our public meetings to engage the community now. I believe Judy helped spearhead that, and there are other organizations within the county who are looking to use that program because it has been so successful. So the Park Authority, again, is leading the way in a lot of this outreach effort. We've also created and are utilizing our social media. So the farmers market in particular, the Twitter accounts for each of the farmers markets have really gotten the word out relative to, number one, how we dealt with the pandemic once we reopened the farmers markets, all the guidelines that we put into place. And we're seeing, again, we saw and we are seeing incredible passion for those farmers markets everywhere from Lake Ann in Reston to the Mount Vernon area to the Burke area. Everybody is very enthusiastic and kind of sharing their passion on the feed related to the farmers market. So again, kind of capturing the passion that's out there and utilizing things to help us from a technological perspective to help us share that. And again, kind of get the buzz out there, which in part is a lot of sharing the good news. We've also created a little over a year ago, a program called We Are. So We Are the Park Authority program to encourage staff in the field to tell their story about the impacts of the parks, to share themselves as ambassadors to the park system when they talk to the community and share items for the community. And of course, as I said, we increased our social media presence by utilizing and really spearheading both from an internal perspective, our Staff Praise Awards, which is our customer service awards for staff, and then also the Gold Medal Award, which was a national achievement last year. About this time, we received that award. We've made a critical link to the community as well, using social media and our outreach programs related to the COVID-19 pandemic by utilizing various tools, including some that we've listed here, and the platforms to reach and engage as many people as we absolutely have done possible, both on a community level and also on a staff level. Next slide, please. Also, wanted to talk about advancing the park system excellence. A lot of work in that area related to organizational development. We hired an organizational development training professional a little over a year ago related to working on the professional development from an interior perspective and career management program so we could grow our interior workforce while enhancing our gold medal organization. We've created, in addition to that, we created a workforce council to help us identify what are the HR and hiring practices and onboarding practices that we need to take a look at from those recently brought on board, as well as those that are intimately involved in the hiring process to bring on board our nearly 3,000 employees each year as we ramp up in our typical summer. And so looking at best practices and how we can improve our outreach and related to just bringing on and onboarding and keeping staff on board relative to the training and the structure that's required. We've also restructured our new employee orientation over the last year, primarily, again, through the mechanism of technology. We used to do these in person, and now with the COVID, we've created a structure where everything's online. We have a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, depending on how big the attendance is. And it involves myself as well as the deputies. We have panel discussion and outreach related to each of the sites and community areas that are involved. And we typically get anywhere between 15 and 20 staff on a regular basis that we onboard as they're new to the agency. We also have been emphasizing employee health and welfare related to our park system. From an internal perspective, it's important to take care of our staff and make them aware of the health benefits and the welfare benefits that are provided by not only the county, but also the park authority. Things like stress counseling, especially related to COVID. I know a lot of folks probably have reached out related to that. And as simple as test your blood pressure machines that we've put in a lot of the work sites now. So staff can just take a minute and relax and actually monitor their health. Again, just kind of some minor things that we've worked on, but very much emphasizing the employee, the value of the employee, and keeping our employees healthy. We've also focused on our business planning efforts related to benchmarking and drafting the templates related to our business processes and working with the internal county audit to improve our business processes and do audits regularly, 2 to 3 a year over the last many years, but in particular, the last couple of years on process improvements and outreach improvements and procurement improvements that will help speed and also improve the way that we do our businesses and securing those things that are required to take care of our operations. And then lastly, we created a Directors Advisory Council, which is really a leadership development tool. And it's made up of folks throughout the community of staff, multiple levels, multiple years of experience. And it provides a leadership opportunity to, number one, develop a team atmosphere, a much stronger team atmosphere that's going to sit on a board to look at issues and initiatives that we are trying to move forward or issues that we may have, and getting a greater level of insight from not only the director's level, mid-management level, but also the boots on the ground level. And that's been going on now, I guess, for about a little over a year. And then, of course, we continue to work on realignment and organizational structure, whether it's the human resources and financial management or the IT branch, and trying to improve processes and improve efficiencies related to resource limitations, but making sure we're able to get the work done with the amount of resources we have. This has been particularly important as we've gone through the COVID and went in through a hiring freeze for almost 7 months. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the dynamic of meeting our changing recreation needs from an interior perspective, looking at our asset management program. We've talked about this for a number of years, our total cost of ownership. So we've developed a formal asset management program. We have staff now that we've hired for that over the last several years and been focusing on that, including kind of jettisoning our previous work with Tririga, the old IBM structure that just was not working for either us or the county. And we're working now through a procurement process with the county to secure a new asset management data collection and analysis system. So hopefully that will be completed in the next year and a half. And we've also worked to expand our GIS capabilities related to geospatial data sets and GIS applications. Some of this we shared in the past related to how we're looking at our invasive species management, but we're also looking at it related to our buildings and facilities now. It's opened up a whole new ballpark related to how GIS works. It's not just a location service now. It actually is involved in facility management and operational understanding of the needs that each of those facilities is put under, whether it's accessed by the community or flow patterns or energy patterns. It's very incredible now, frankly, the things that we're doing with GIS. We also have developed a centralized overall management of our capital equipment. That used to be spread out in multiple areas in the Park Authority. And so from the perspective of improving the internal organization to meet our changing recreational needs and demands, the centralization and overall management of our capital equipment purchases and monitoring has helped significantly in speeding up purchases and also allowing us quicker actions related to taking care of some failing equipment that is capital equipment. And of course, you saw, some of you, the applications that we developed and used for our park monitoring program before the COVID. So one of these things related to the COVID would be, being able to understand the type of use that we're seeing, the type of abuse that we're seeing, how many calls have gone to the police, what are the types of violations we're seeing. And so each of the sites monitors now has a application that they can do right then, right there. It's collected on real time and put into the database for our monitoring. Next slide, please. So as a big part of what we're looking at, and we've been focused on really for the last nearly 7 years, is being equitable and inclusive in our programs and activities. And so as One Fairfax was developed, we were, frankly, the board, our board, you all have been far ahead of the curve relative to recognizing this need. And so it was an easy step to jump into and support One Fairfax and come on board with that relative to the work that you all had done and recommended that we start taking looks at. So as we've developed our equitable, inclusive look, Sarah and others have been working on our equity plan. And so as we noted before in previous presentations, our equity plan was noted by Carla Bruce as one of the good plans that really started to focus at the very beginning on things that we needed to take a look at and used as an example for other county agencies to follow. It's focused on community engagement, human resources development. So I talked some about that related to the hiring practices and the onboarding practices as we look to kind of systemic discrimination that's occurred in the county and in the nation, but particularly in the county and the Park Authority. We've got to make those changes. So we're working hard to do that. Access both to physical buildings and also to programs. And so as we look towards moving and expanding beyond our current equity program related to classes, so our scholarship program, and you all provide over $1 million to the community and over 8,000 or 9,000 participants in that each year, but it's focused primarily on programs and not facility access. And so that's the next step, is looking at facility access and working with the county to help achieve that. We've also worked to create new venues and methodologies as we look to improve trust and participation across the Park Authority. So again, from an internal perspective, looking at things that will help improve getting ideas forward and two-way communications back and forth to staff. So the idea portal is something that we came up with a couple of years ago, where staff have a direct link to the leadership team in the director's office, and we review these every 2 weeks on a regular basis. We get back to staff and let them know, are they moving forward? Do we need more information? Are we already in process of doing something like this, or what restrictions there might be related to the idea, or that it's a good idea and we need to put some more mechanisms in place to move this forward. All the while making sure staff knows that they've been heard and they've been listened to. So from an inclusive perspective, making sure that they are aware where their ideas are and how it is in particular helping the Park Authority. We have implemented town halls that are virtual now. We used to do 3 or 4 town halls a year live in person in the Park Authority. We're doing one every 2 weeks now, either a town hall or a supervisory staff meeting. So I should say at least once a month now. The last town hall, which was yesterday, we had 165 people in attendance virtually. And that is pretty standard. We get great questions, and we have the ability actually to answer those questions in person. So the staff gets to hear it directly, either from me or from Sarah or from Amy or other leadership team relative to the questions they might ask. And as I mentioned, supervisory roundtables that focused really on the supervisory issues that have come up, in particular related to COVID, the pandemic. And that ranges everything from the health issues that might come up to HR related issues to how do I do this and how do I respond? So there's been overwhelming support from the staff community about all these items. And I mentioned the Directors Advisory Council and the Workforce Council working together to, again, provide other development opportunities for our staff and be more inclusive and equitable in our approach. Next slide, please. So one of the things, of course, for us to do, and part of our guidelines and core mission, is really to promote healthy lifestyles. So one of the things that we brought to you early in the year was that we were selected as one of 8 pilot areas across the nation by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, to implement the walking campaign. And they awarded us $30,000 to implement the Move Your Way campaign. Kickoff events were scheduled in March, but of course with the COVID, we canceled all those due to the pandemic. And we refunneled that money to work with our free virtual fitness classes that were offered for the community through online services. Ongoing participation in the interagency urban work group related to the Annandale pop-up and fitness awareness program back in 2019, as well as our work with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation in the presentation that you saw in the last board meeting related to the Active Fairfax look at trails and access to parkland. Our push with that program in particular is going to be focusing on equity and taking a look at how we provide access to the parks throughout our greater community. Next slide, please. And of course, one of the things that we're always known for, and we've been working strong on, and it's been a regular part of the Park Authority, is to strengthen and foster our partnerships. So just from a quick perspective on some of the things that we've looked at internally, in addition to all the work that we do with Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, other sports organizations, professional and amateur that we work with, as well as all the volunteer program folks that we work with through the IMA and all the other programs that the Park Authority supports. We've worked with the Park Foundation to better align the projects that coordinate with our prospective donors so that we can, in fact, get dollars that focus on areas that you all and we see as crucial to the Park Authority, including the preservation of land of high ecological value. So one of the things that we did this past year, working with the foundation, was create that open space land preservation fund related to high ecological value. And we've got regular contributors to that right now. And then working with gift designation to align, as I said, with the Park Authority priorities and expanding our recognition of friends groups and park volunteers as they help move us towards this goal. We have worked to increase capacity of capacity building grants with our friends groups, again, sponsored through the Park Foundation, to give them the ability to come in line with the new regulations from the state and the county perspective so that they are covered by insurance. They are listed in the volunteer and donations program so they can solicit funds legally and work towards those things that have helped improve the Friends program. We'll be working to kick off the Sully Woodlands Stewardship Center project this next year. I believe it goes under construction, but there's been great partnership there related to the community and public works as we look to bring forward one of our premier facilities related to stewardship and the environment at this location. And of course, we were involved, and we actually spearheaded and led the sports tourism report, worked through Supervisor Harity and his office and the Board of Supervisors. Many of you, including Chairman Bowie, were on the committee involved with this, as well as many of our staff throughout the Park Authority, the school system, neighborhood community services, as well as the county staff involved in economic development. Next slide, please. And of course, a big focus for the Park Authority is always being great stewards related to our land and both our cultural aspect and our environmental aspect. So we have the Helping Our Land Heal program. It's been in existence for several years now, but this year we conducted field surveys of parks in the western area of the county to confirm the current data set to make sure it is accurate and related to the geography and natural communities of the Fairfax County Park Authority properties. So we've collected that data. We've also completed an inventory of the wildlife in these western areas, developed a standard operating procedure which allows easy access to the geographic data for the small reforestation areas that we have, and created educational signage, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, for natural resources restoration projects on our property. And in Active Fairfax, relative to our participation with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation's countywide planning effort, again, working to consider non-motorized transportation. You all dealt with that early on related to some of our policy issues. So bringing that forward was critical into what we needed to do. And then best practices related to just looking at our research papers from a parks count, a better living perspective, and best practices on the white papers to help staff work towards the new policies that would be brought to the board and we bring to the board, and actions that we should consider as we implement open space preservation and planning practices, whether it's new walkable park access areas or health come indicators, which we're working on right now to be able to show the benefit of parks from a health perspective. Next slide, please. And of course, as we go into FY 21, really the focus is going to be incorporating a substantial amount of our work into our equity approach related to our planning, both for the strategic planning and any of the action steps that we look at taking once we fully understand our financial reality. In our 7th month of COVID, there's still a lot of uncertainties related to the finance, both from the county's perspective and from the park authority's perspective. So it's important for us to make sure that we align our implementation plan with this COVID reality, with our resources that we have and the staffing that we have, and that they reflect the actions that are current relative to our staffing levels and our desires as far as the highest priorities. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions for either Sarah, myself, or Amy.
Thanks, Kurt. Any questions, anybody? Anybody? Ron?
Yeah, I guess this is a question for another time. I'd like to find out at some moment how you're going to measure the changes you're making. What data you're going to use, and how you're going to look at either behavioral change or financial change when it comes to our ongoing budget.
Okay, we'll get that information back to you. It's a little more detail. Absolutely.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We'll go on to chairman's matters. I'll be brief. One, again, just kudos to the entire staff and board and the entire park authority team. The job that you folks are doing is absolutely tremendous, and you're having a very, very positive effect out there in the community. So thank you on behalf of all of us to all of you for the great job that you're doing. And I know we say this every meeting, but it's, something remarkable happens within the 2 weeks that we meet, and especially with the conditions as tough as they are. And seeing that we're starting to see an uptick again in cases, we're getting into that time where things are don't necessarily look so good going into winter. So we need to be especially careful in following directions and listening to health experts on what we need to do. We've done a great job so far managing, but we can't take our eye off the ball, and we need to continue to be persistent in following those rules. Second thing, make sure you get out and vote. It's too late to put out, maybe too late to put out your sign, but make a call, send a text, send an email, get out there and vote. I went out to a number of parks on Saturday, socially distanced, but I had my signs and answered folks' questions. So if you get a chance to do that, please do that. I am serving on the equity task force for Chairman McKay. It's pretty intensive work. It's basically 2.5 to 3 hours every Friday, either on a committee or a subcommittee. There's 43 different people. There's a vast array of different backgrounds, ethnicities, cultures on this thing. The beauty of it is that they're all residents or part of some organization. There's no board of supervisor input in this at all. So it's really critical work that's being done. Parks is a big issue around the subcommittee that I'm on. So if you have any ideas around equity and how we can improve equity within the park system and in overall looking at the county and the services that we provide, please feel free to send those to me. And then congratulations to the Reston Community Center. I'm the vice chair on that board, but the Reston Community Center tonight is going to be one of the only non-park agencies to be able to get CAPRA accreditation. So this evening, Reston Community Center is getting their CAPRA accreditation, and that's pretty cool. But I can tell you that our board at the RCC and the staff of the Park Authority has been tremendous. The staff at the RCC has certainly been inspired by the great work done by the board and the staff at the Park Authority. And that was really the impetus of having them go through this exercise, and we're all better in the community for it. So thank you for your inspiration and support. Last but not least, on the resident curator program and the conservation lease program, I would really appreciate it, Kirk or Amy or Sarah, if you could send that presentation to Marie Reinsdorf, who was formerly on our board. She was the original inspiration for the resident curator program, to let her know that the work is being done and accomplished, and the seeds that she planted some number of years ago are coming to fruition. And a thank you on behalf of the current board for her pushing that movement forward, and it's a great thing. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we will make sure to send Marie that presentation with a thank you note for her work bringing this to fruition all those years ago. We also do want to congratulate Lila Gordon and the board at Reston on their achievement. There are probably still less than 200 agencies out of the 25 agencies in the nation that are CAPRA accredited. Sarah will probably know the exact number because she stays right on top of that related to CAPRA, but you don't have to throw it out there now. Sarah, I'm not putting you on the spot. But I just want to say great job, Lila, and I know our team, Sarah and Amy and others, had a great time working with you to help bring that to fruition, but it really goes to you and your team. And so thank you, Lila, and Bill, thank you for bringing that up. We enjoyed working with them as we always do. For those of you interested in history, you remember probably Oak Hill. We used to do open houses, regular open houses once a year there. We're doing a virtual open house because, as the chairman indicated, we are not doing events and we are not doing ribbon cuttings right now because we're still in phase 3 and nothing has changed. So we're not putting anybody at risk in that regard. We are having an open house video debut on November 1st at noon. And Judy and Hannah and a big team helped create that. So I want to say hats off to them and great work. This was quite an achievement in bringing this forward, and folks will be able to tour the over 200-year boxwood locations as well as the interior of the facility as they look at Oak Hill. And with that, Mr. Chair, I want to say thank you and good health to all.
Thank you, sir. Okay, around the horn, Mr. Kendall.
Well, first off, I wanted to add my on the voting this year. I want to thank Kirk and the staff at the Park Authority for making properties available for the absentee in-person voting. Even with our assistance at the Park Authority, lines have been 1 to 2 hours long at some of these properties. So I want to thank everyone who's been part of opening those properties, but I also think we are looking at a trend and we need to think how we can help next year. Because Virginia has pretty much an election every year, how we can try to make it so that nobody has to stand in line for more than an hour. My second thing is I want to thank Sarah Baldwin and FCPA staff for the work they did at Spring Lane. I got a wonderful letter today from some of the residents who have been out there in their parks. And the beauty, I think, of Fairfax County parks is they are open year round. So even when it gets bad in the winter, you can get out of the house. So Sarah, please, everybody who worked on the Spring Lane project, let them know that the residents are really happy with their park.
Sarah Baldwin, Deputy Director. Thank you, Ron. And I will pass on your appreciation to Karen Crescent and Kevin Williams and Park Ops who managed the work.
And don't forget Dave.
Thanks, Ron. Ken?
Ken Quincy, I would definitely want to second Chairman Bowie's remarks about the efforts and success of Park Authority management team and staff. It's especially in these challenging times. And I think the two new additions as division directors will even add to that. Kudos to you all. And I would want to mention a couple major IMA efforts that took place in the past couple of weeks. A lot of trees got planted, which was good. So that's a major volunteer effort that just keeps going on and on.
Thank you, sir. Jim Zook?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Zook. I would also echo the praise, well-deserved to the staff. I think it's been tremendous the way the operations have been continued. I, from time to time, do get out to the golf course and unfortunately probably spend about 6 hours out there, mostly hunting for my golf balls. But anyway, congratulations to the staff. I think you're doing one heck of a fine job. Thank you.
Abner?
Hi, I'm Abna Edu. I will join in saying thank you to all the staff and management. We truly appreciate all the hard work you put in during these very extraordinary times. So thank you so much.
Cynthia?
This is Cynthia Jacobs Carter. I would also echo the sentiments that have been made so far, and I will add to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your wonderful and very able leadership. We appreciate you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Cynthia. Faisal?
Well, as usual, thank you and kudos to the staff for wonderful work these testing times. And everyone, please vote for the bond and tell people to vote for the bond. Thanks.
Kyle?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Linwood? You're on mute.
Yeah, I couldn't find my cursor there for a minute. Just want to take the opportunity. I've been getting a lot of constituent calls about big variety of issues and stuff like that. Lots of staff have been helping me with it, but I know both Kirk and Amy have really been getting a lot of calls from me, and they're not necessarily easy two-word answer kind of things. And want to just take a little time to tell you I appreciate you and thank you very much for helping me out.
Maggie? Maggie?
No, I'm Maggie Godbold here. Concur with everybody's comments about the great work the staff is doing. I also want to thank Kirk and the leadership team for that great update on the strategic plan. It's important to keep track of that, and so we really, really appreciate it. Thanks, that's it. Thanks.
Michael?
Thank you. This is Mike Thompson. I want to thank the staff, but I want to also point out and thank them for the amount of hard work that's gone on for making it possible for all the youth and adult sports activity that has been going on. There have been lots of issues, both in terms of walk-ons, issues where police have had to have been called, lots of competing constituencies to try to balance out. and the staff has worked closely with NCS and the school system as we've tried to make, I guess, lemonade out of lemons and do things in accordance with the county's rules and regulations. And I know it's not been easy as somebody who has clearly worked a lot with the sports community. I know there are lots of competing demands from everybody who says, hey, just open it up 100% and treat it as if there's nothing going on, to folks that say close it completely. So I appreciate the continued effort to balance those equities and to make things work. And with that, I'll remind people to vote for the bond.
Thank you. Tim?
We are blessed with an excellent and hardworking staff, and beyond that, Mr. Chairman, I will pass. Thank you. Tim Hackman.
All right, good deal. We will now go into closed session.
This is Mike Thompson. I move the Park Authority Board recess and convene in closed session for discussion and consideration of matters enumerated in Virginia Code 2.2-3711 and listed in the agenda for the meeting as follows. Discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or of the disposition of publicly held real property, or discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A3.
Ken Quincy, I second the motion.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. We are now in closed session for approximately 10 minutes.